Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
I began the meeting by making this statement, which I think needs to be made to the nation. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I have asked the Congress to provide the legislative authority and the funds to fuel this kind of an offensive.
1960s New York City was a period of intense change. Rapidly shifting demographics, social policies, and police methods put this city at a crossroads. This change began putting the residents at odds with city officials, including an increasingly uncaring New York Police Department. But how did the city arrive at this point? To understand this change, you first have to understand New York City's past. In the 1800s, New York became a beacon for many European immigrants. Italian and Irish immigrants settled throughout the 5 boroughs, but they often faced discrimination and had little opportunities for economic success. As a result, a criminal underground began to grow. This started off small, with some neighborhoods forming Black Hands, small gangs that engaged in extortion, kidnapping, and potentially murder. These gangs began to grow and attracted future big leaguers like Al Capone, Frankie Yale, and Bugsy Siegel. The outcome of this growth was that these gangs could now expand their operations to bootlegging and smuggling, bank robbery, bribery, and outright election fraud as they worked closely with corrupt political machines and individual politicians. As it would seem, crime did in fact pay. However, New York City began to change quickly in the mid-1900s. Slowly but surely, the FBI and local police departments began prosecuting mafia members. Laws were enacted that created harsh sentences for racketeering. 1970 saw the passing of the RICO Act, which made it easier to prosecute leaders of various crime families. Changing demographics also affected New York. Although European immigrants dominated the city in the 1800s, the Great Migration of the early 1900s saw a mass influx of African Americans into the city to escape discrimination and Jim Crow laws in the South. These African Americans were later joined by Caribbean and Latin American immigrants as U.S. imperialist policies decimated the areas they were from. Black Americans found mixed success in New York. They were able to find jobs, but these were low-paying, exploitative jobs. They were unable to escape the discrimination they experienced in the South, as they were met with hostility and sometimes violence by police officers and the Italian and Irish Americans who lived in the same areas. The civil rights movement was not limited to the South. Black Americans in New York City persisted in their fight for equal schooling, access to housing, and influence in politics. Despite some successes, Black communities in New York City still struggled as the city government ignored persistent issues in Black communities in favor of improving whiter communities. The NYPD made matters worse by singling out Black individuals while using racist methodologies, such as the broken windows policies and stop and frisk. These conditions were exacerbated after Richard Nixon took office. Seeking to criminalize his enemies, Richard Nixon began the disastrous war on drugs. According to multiple allegations, Nixon willfully allowed newer and harder drugs like heroin to enter Black communities and then enacted laws with harsh sentencing to break up those communities. This is the reality New Yorkers faced as they entered the 1970s. This new decade saw a rise in police corruption and gang violence, as well as a city-wide fiscal crisis. New York City was becoming a dangerous place for everyone. All of these conditions help set up the story that I'm going to look at today. Hello, welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about unusual and out-of-the-ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. If you'll excuse me, I had to borrow Lucas from the Bits of Lit, his style of presenting videos just for today, because there's a lot of history that I needed to unfold within this story. Today I wanted to Today I wanted to talk about a book that I read, one that is about religion and crime set in 1960s Brooklyn, New York. I am referring to Deacon King Kong by James McBride. For those that don't know, James McBride is an author who has focused on the Black experience before. He is Black himself. He's a musician as well as a writer. He's written a number of books. I haven't encountered him before. I was able to find a copy of Deacon King Kong from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. Something of note is he wrote Red Hook Summer, or helped co-write Red Hook Summer, a movie directed by Spike Lee. So he's had a multitude of experiences in talking about the Black experience in America. And so without further ado, let's talk about Deacon King Kong today. I'll do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. Deacon King Kong is set in Brooklyn, New York City in the 1960s, 1969 to be exact. It focuses on the cause projects in New York City, an apartment complex sort of run down that's home to a number of Black Americans as well as immigrants from Caribbean and Latin American nations. The story focuses on multiple perspectives, but it primarily focuses on Deacon Sportcoat, a man of God. He's a deacon in a local church who's sort of down on his luck. His wife died in the recent past, and he argues with her ghost that only he can see pretty frequently. Although it's really part of his mind, not really an actual ghost. He drinks a lot. He does drugs. He annoys his neighbors, but he's also seen as one of the best parts of the community because he's willing to do anything to improve the community. He cleans up at the church. And he's seen as a pretty wholesome character, so the community views him with love. During one day in the cause projects, Deacon King Kong shows up and attempts to shoot a man named Deems Clements, a 19-year-old young man who used to be on the Cause Project's baseball team before he turned to drugs. It seems that Deacon is going to kill him, but luckily an undercover police officer in the area that everybody knows is a police officer, which I think is funny, warns him, and so Deems moves out of the way, but he only gets his ear shot in the process. Deacon ends up going away for a little bit and has no memory of the events of shooting Deems. So it's bizarre, and part of the story is figuring out why Deacon chose to do it. The criminal underworld in this story is a bit concerned about what happened, as they believe it'll bring unwanted police attention that they can't bribe or cajole into going away. And it's also going to bring a power vacuum because Deems was the primary drug dealer in the cause projects, and now he's viewed as easily removed. Other people might try to move in, which hurts criminal interest, especially as new drugs like heroin and meth are being introduced into the community and making a lot of people a lot of money. There's also a bit of a rift going on between the criminals of old, like a man called the Governor and a man called Thomas Elefante, who is part of a criminal empire that expands a couple decades. The Elefante is an Italian American who runs smuggling and dockside criminal operations, including doing murder and whatnot. So Elefante is from a criminal from the past, and he's coming into conflict with the newer criminals who are willing to sell drugs. Elefante does not want to sell drugs, and part of the story is that he's looking for a valuable object that might be hidden in the cause projects area. It's a weird subplot, in my opinion, but I think it's interesting in revealing more about the ways of the past versus what's going on in the present. There's also a struggle going on between Sister Gee, who works at the same Deacon church that Deacon Sportcoat works at. She's very protective of her community, and she comes into conflict with Officer Potts, who has been on the police force for about 20 years now and is pretty close to retirement. They both have differing views on how to go about protecting the community. Sister Gee has noted that the police officers have been no help in the past, and now they're only working to criminalize the people of color living in the cause projects. And there's a whole bunch of corruption and just bad stuff going on with the police in the area, and how drugs have entered the community and it's making everything worse. And Officer Potts believes that the people of the cause projects need to work with the police, and that by not doing so, they're failing their own communities. And it's just frustrating him even more. And he's happy that he's retiring because he realizes this problem is getting out of hand. Later on in the story, Deems is on a date at the dock area, just sitting at the pier, when it turns out his date is a hit woman, and she kills one of his criminal colleagues and attempts to kill Deems, but luckily Sportcoat shows up and saves him in the process. So why did Sportcoat show up? What was his motivation there? I'll let you figure this out. This is a fairly recent book, and I don't want to spoil too much in this section, but I probably will go into spoilers in the analysis section. So that's where I'm leaving it right now. In terms of analysis, there's a lot to talk about with this story. As I noted in the introduction to this video, Brooklyn, New York was at a very tumultuous point in its history. As the past and the present were at a point where great change was occurring. You were going from the criminal mafia style background of New York City up to the 1940s and 1950s, and you were switching to a criminal regime, an underworld that was willing to now sell drugs, bribe police officers, and do a lot more killings in order to accomplish and take over control of the city. New York was changing greatly in terms of its demographics. New York was changing in terms of how the city viewed its residents. There was a lot of white flight going on. And I really like about the story how James McBride captures all of that within this story. You see the past versus the present confronting one another, with Officer Potts and Sister Gee talking. You also see it with Elefante interacting with the Deacon in the story, and interacting, or just seeing his thoughts and seeing how he views this changing demographic in the community, and how he wants to get out of crime as soon as possible because he doesn't see a place for himself there anymore. So I got to give credit to McBride for being able to capture all of that history and put it in the story in a somewhat meaningful way. A big theme of this story is the mistrust between the police and the cause projects. I noted that in the introduction as well, how there doesn't seem to be a lot of goodwill between the cause project residents and the people of the police officers who kind of view the people of the cause projects and a lot of the black residents in Brooklyn as savages, and they're very racist undertones, which is, we're in the middle of the civil rights movement, almost in the 1970s, and the New York Police Department is still incredibly racist. It's still racist to this day. That's something that's never truly left the New York Police Department. And so the residents don't really want to talk to the police. They don't want to interact with the police because every interaction is bad. And then you have Sister Gee and Hobbs who are interacting. There's kind of a romance brewing between them, but it's never able to fully develop because Sister Gee and Officer Potts have different hopes for the community. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you. "This guy's operation runs all the way from Queens to Georgia. It's something you can't get in the way of. Are you interested in doing that? The police? Us. Yes." "Well, you got us wrong," she said tersely. "All we want is our Christmas club money." He laughed. "What are you talking about? You step in the middle of a major Brooklyn drug operation and send the drug king's muscle man home by subway with a lump on his head the size of Philadelphia. You threaten the same muscle man by saying you know his dead minister father. All for your church club money?" "He came here courting troubles," she said angrily, "and them's hard dollars in our church club money. Nobody knows how much is in there. Whatever it is, it's not enough to risk your skin. You have no idea what you're dealing with," Potts said. And then Sister Gee proceeds to talk about how Potts doesn't live in this community. She doesn't understand Deems Clemens or where he comes from. He doesn't understand the problems in his community that have been developing and are currently in the process of exploding. And Potts, for his part, argues that Sister G in her methodology here, she's wrong. She needs to be more open to the police. She needs to provide more information. The entire community does. And it really highlights in the story the police indifference, the corruption that exists, because throughout the story, there's a bunch of police officers who are willing to talk to the criminal, especially Elefante, in exchange for some money, which he's always willing to provide. And then there's a lot of racism in this community, as the police officers are shown openly despising the people of color and viewing them as savages. And so when you look at Sister Gee and Officer Potts's argument here, it's much easier to see Sister Gee's point that the police officers are viewing the cause projects as a burden. And although they say they want to help, they're not actually helping anyone. They're going after low-level criminals like Deems Clemens. They're not going after the big cheeses. They're not going after the crime lords in the area. Potts is shown interacting with Elefante, not in a corrupt sense, but in a sense that they both know that they're working against one another, a sense of camaraderie or something, I guess. And so, Potts isn't going to arrest or do anything about Elefante, but is willing to arrest the black criminals who are doing low-level crime. What does that say? It shows that the police have no interest in protecting the community. Their only interest is making sure that they get people of color off the streets because they're viewed as a burden to the community. So it's very easy to side with Sister Gee here because she actually wants to improve her community. She recognizes the problems that exist and how the city has largely left her behind. And Potts is kind of an idiot and a dunce for not recognizing these issues. Or if he probably does recognize these issues, but he doesn't care to do anything about it, much like with how the New York NYPD just didn't care about the problems in these communities at the time. Another interesting theme about this story is how Deacon Sportcoat is running from his past. One of the issues in the story is that his wife sort of drowned herself in the harbor a couple of years before the story started. Pretty extreme event, and he doesn't exactly know why that happened. But he's also kind of refusing to acknowledge that it even happened in the first place. There's a lot of stuff in the story that he's not willing to talk about, such as his experience in South Carolina, and the fact that he moved to New York for a better life. And he didn't exactly get a better life. And so he's turned to drugs and alcohol and avoiding his own reality in order to feel better about the situation that he's in. And near the end of the story, he has an important moment where he realizes he can't run from that anymore. If he does that, he's ignoring the problems that exist in the community. That he can at least try to make the community better himself. I like this transformation that Sportcoat goes through. I feel that if McBride had focused more on Sportcoat as a character rather than making this an ensemble piece, it would have been a stronger hit in the story. But I like what McBride does here. Definitely acknowledging that Sportcoat is running from his past, and it's not really benefiting the community to be so out of it. One of the issues that I have with the story, though, is the reasoning behind Sportcoat shooting Deems. In the story, Sportcoat shoots Deems, and you immediately wonder, why did he do that? And then later on, it's revealed that he doesn't exactly have a memory of the event, and so you're wondering, well, what is this all leading to? Why is he saving Deems later on in the story? And it raises a lot of questions. Why did Sportcoat shoot Deems? And McBride reveals at the end of the story that Sportcoat shot Deems because he saw Deems was sort of wasting his potential. Deems had great potential to become a baseball player and leave the community and then later contribute back to the community. But instead, he chose drugs as the answer. He sought to make money and improve his own personal situation rather than looking out for the community, and as a result he's selling drugs there now. And it kind of makes sense why Sportcoat would shoot Deems. He argues later on in the story that he's preserving the image of Deems as he was rather than letting him go down a bad path and start selling drugs and waste away his own potential and that of the community. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you there. "Now I know why I tried to kill you," Sportcoat said, "for the life of goodness is not one that your people has chosen for you. I don't want that you should end up like me or my head a dead of sorrow in the harbor. I'm in the last Octobers of life, boy. I ain't got many more Aprils left. It's a right end for an old drunk like me, and a right end for you too that you die as a good boy. Strong and handsome and smart, like I remembers you. Best pitcher in the world, boy who could pitch his way out of the shithole we has to live in. Better to remember you that way than as the sewer you has become. That's a good dream. That's a dream an old drunk like me deserves at the end of his days. For I done wasted every penny I had in the ways of goodness so long ago. I can't remember him no more." That's an interesting quote from Sportcoat as he explains to Deems while he's trying to kill him again, why he tried to kill him in the first place. He ends up not killing Deems, and Deems goes on to become a baseball player at the end of the story. But it kind of makes sense, killing someone to preserve their image rather than letting them become a terrible human down the road. But it also ignores the ultimate message of the story, the ultimate historical context of the story. If Sportcoat kills Deems, that's it for Deems. He doesn't become a baseball player. He doesn't sell drugs anymore. But as the story has noted, once Deems is out of the picture, someone is going to fill his place. Someone is going to continue to sell drugs in the cause projects. Heroin and crystal meth and all kinds of other drugs are going to continue to enter the community. The police are going to continue to be corrupt and everything. Killing Deems doesn't do anything in the bigger picture. It doesn't address the underlying social issues that exist in the community. It just robs Deems of any of his potential to get out of this situation. So I kind of understand why Sportcoat did it, but it also seems that McBride, by painting Deems as a hero in this situation, is arguing that that's the right way to go about things. But it doesn't seem to be the right way to go about things because all the issues will still exist even after you kill Deems, even after you preserve his image. That's just one good image. It doesn't change the fact that the cause projects are still going to hell in a handbasket, unfortunately. And that's my problem with the overall ending of the story, is it seems far too optimistic. At the end of the story, Sportcoat dies, and they have a funeral and they celebrate his life, and things seem to be going better in the 4 Points church community thing, where they finally got the money they needed with the help of Elefante. But the racism and underlying indifference from the New York Police Department and the city as a whole still exist. The cause projects aren't going to get any better. You're still entering the 1970s, where landlords actively burned down their own residences to collect insurance money, which ruined life in the Bronx in particular. And things didn't seem to get much better in Brooklyn. So this ending seems overly optimistic and ignores the historical context for which it is in. And I'm not saying that McBride needs to adhere to the historical context, but you should at least acknowledge it when ending this story, and not paint a picture that everything's going to be a-okay. At least from my perspective, maybe it works in a bottle, but when you consider everything outside of the story, the residents of the cause projects are not in for a very positive future. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on Deacon King Kong by James McBride. A pretty good story about religion and crime in New York City in the 1960s. I hope that by talking about the historical context for which this story is placed, I've helped you understand this story a little better. It's certainly a fascinating look into Brooklyn in the 1960s through a fictitious perspective. I definitely recommend it to you out there. There were parts of this that I didn't enjoy, but I certainly felt like I was entertained, and it like James McBride's writing was pretty solid. So definitely recommend. Go find this if you can. Otherwise, if you read this before or you want to comment on my review, please do so below. I would love to hear from you. Let's have a discussion about this. And in the meantime, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about James McBride's work. And in the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and crime-ridden travels. Farewell.